Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your Cannabis Business podcast.
All right, thanks for joining us for a special broadcast with Talking Hedge and cannabis legalization news, and JJ McKay from the Fresh Toast, and Thomas, of course, the co-host. What up, JJ?
Not much. What's up with y'all? It's so great to the country's reopening up and people are barreling forward in their business.
Yes. Yeah, you got your shots?
Yes, I do have my shots. I got the Moderna.
Oh, well, I got the Pfizer. J&J.
Sad.
Yeah.
Hey, look, any shots is the best shots.
Yes. Yes.
I'm not asking.
I still had a mask on the plane, and I don't like having to mask on a plane. Active masking stinks. You have to eat, put it back up. 4 hours took me to get from St. Louis to Seattle.
In 20 minutes.
It's a 4 hour and 20-minute flight. I only fly if it's a 4 hour and 20-minute flight.
But the good thing is we're helping others, and that's the most important part. And we're reducing the stress of all those poor people who have to work on the planes.
Yeah.
God love them. What a tough job right now.
Mm-hmm. Or Amtrak. But how's the Fresh Toast going?
Fresh Toast is going great. We're thrilled by how things are going. We're doing some more things. Just for everybody knows, we're a media content company that produces probably some of the most content in the marijuana and medical marijuana space. Plus, we do some other cultural content, and then we take it, run it on our site, share it with our 1.5 million social media followers, and then we syndicate it out to newspapers in the U.S. and Canada. So about 1 million people are exposed to our content every day, and so we feel we're helping the battle as North America begins transforming and looking at cannabis in a very different way.
Nice. Yeah, I remember when you guys did your launch party out here in Seattle. I just thought it was neat.
2017.
Yeah. So you've been 4 years into it now.
Can you believe it?
Yeah.
So hey, look, and we came out of cannabis standing because a lot of people closed during.
Oh yeah.
Some sad, some deserved, but look, we keep our eyes facing forward, and we try to be very responsible and try to listen to our consumers.
Sure.
What was one story that you saw or wrote or read last year during the pandemic? What's one story that you saw that kind of sticks out in your mind for one reason or another?
We wound up doing a lot of follow-up from this, but the number one story that we saw was, I watched the Today Show. I watch a lot of mainstream media, and it said a third of people were willing to trade to give up a sex life for a good night's sleep.
Oh, geez.
And so that's for us, because we do such a great amount of medical content, let us know that people were really stressed.
Mm.
And we spun off a lot of stories about sleep, relaxation, sex life, entryways into, hey, you just don't have to sit there by yourself and get, smoke a joint.
Yeah.
Have a quarter of an edible and see how that works for you.
Oh, wow.
And we saw a lot of uptick. One some of our biggest stories every weekend is the entry into the system and how to exit out of the system. How do I get stoned the first time? What happens if I get too much stoned? And and we constantly have to repeat those stories of, the worst. And for 99.9% of the people, worst thing can happen. You're going to fall asleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've noticed some mild paranoia when I'm really, really stoned. I'm not sure. Is it just me, or does anybody else get kind of paranoid when they've had too much?
I have a very close person in my life who gets paranoia, but he only gets it with joints.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I have provided him edibles. And he does not get that with edibles. And in fact, in edibles, it's a more multisensory, joyful journey for him.
Mm-hmm.
So I would suggest changing up how you do things.
Yeah. Certain cultivars will give me, like we were just at Sitka, a hash company, and they have green crack. And that particular strain gives me, it makes me edgy, not angry, but puts me on edge. It's just weird. So it's not really anxiety necessarily, but it hits me the wrong way, and I just have to steer clear of green crack. Plus, the name is just ridiculous anyways.
I heard Snoop Dogg created that name.
Really?
Green crack.
Mm-hmm.
For the paranoia you're talking about, isn't that more of also too the cannabis is known to accelerate your heartbeat, and that's that paranoia coming into that feeling of.
Let's roll it all back and be practical. Since the beginning of time, we had the same type of effects with alcohol. You know, the whole song "Tequila Makes Her Clothes Fall Off."
Yeah.
You know, drinking tequila makes some people aggressive. Drinking beer chills some people out. Rosé relaxes. You know, how we mentally process with what's something new in our system sometimes doesn't always affect the same way. I always joke with people who smoke. I smoke to calm down. Well, you're making your heart go like 3 times faster,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, if something makes you paranoid, start experimenting with other stuff.
I found I'm allergic to alcohol. I mean, I drink a lot and I tend to puke on myself and, wander in strong places. I'm seriously allergic to it. So
note to self, don't ask to go for a drink afterwards.
But I wanted to. It's 5:00 where I'm from. I was going to blame it on terpenes. Do your readers really care about like terp profiles or flavors?
So, and Josh has heard me say this before, the number one way that Americans get buzzed is via beer. And 51% of America drinks Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light in that order. They own 51% of the beer market.
wow.
So the answer to that question is no. What do they want? How do people buy wine? Price, label, recommendation in that
I was
order.
going to say label. Absolutely. And
Label's number 2.
Yeah.
And it's funny because if you talk to restaurant people, they will say that the majority of people order either the second highest or the second lowest price of bottle of wine because they don't know how to, and so they go with whatever the cost is. They don't want to seem to be the cheapest.
Yeah.
And if they think if they get something semi-expensive, it'll be good. When they don't know much.
That's kind of the secret to your media success, right? Because you appeal to a more broader audience, the newbies. Like you said, you have to repeat the stories about like no one's died from cannabis. Like
how to start it and how to stop it.
Right.
yeah.
Sleep and sex.
Yeah. So I've spent pre-COVID, I spent the 2 years pre-COVID doing a lot of talks in the alcohol and restaurant industry. And it's very fascinating because, everybody's really worried about cannabis. But when it boils down to it, I pulled out a lot of really great information that the average person doesn't realize. And we work in industry that's an industry full of sommeliers trying to talk to the Applebee's customer. And there's a huge disconnect on that information. And that and the passion is very different.
Yeah.
So I asked, because I had a room of like 400 people, and I said, let's do a quick survey. Who has more influence on alcohol or on the purchase of wine? Wine Spectator and Wine Magazine, or Hoda and Jenna from the Today Show? 99% said Hoda and Jenna, and they can say, we can see trends when they push something. We cannot see trends when they push something here. Because from a mass market point of view, that's where it is. Yeah. There's always going to be this high-end model. There'll always be Tiffany and Hermes and so forth. But when we launched, I had a lot of my social girlfriends, especially in LA, are like, he's going to be the Vanity Fair. I'm like, we're the USA Today. And they're like, that's where all the money is. I mean, I would rather own McDonald's than per se.
Sure, but you could have at least placated them and said like, but for you, we'll do exclusive special stories. I'm like, thanks. And like, all right. Back to how to sleep with weed. Yeah.
Which is a huge story. It's a huge story.
And we don't do any of that on cannabis legalization news.
You don't sleep?
Oh, no, there's very little sleeping. And then also we don't talk about strains for sleep or strains for sex. Maybe we did once on Valentine's Day in passing. But ours is usually more how to get the license, states that are moving forward on legalization, terrible atrocities about prisoners, which is just it's our worst rated stuff because nobody likes to be reminded that this is still a criminal enterprise and people are being punished. And even with the Schumer bill, it was a Swiss cheese bill that says if it's here and you're legal, fine. But God forbid you'd go to Indiana and try to do that.
Well, you have to look at part of what we do, though, is change the mindset of the nation. And that's where things can happen. Yeah. You can have extreme activists who are carrying the old school banner of I'm a hippie and I'm a disruptor and all this. And that's not going to change in America. America needs something that makes them comfortable. We love comfort. That's what's going on. I remember when about a year or so after we launched, we were in the Daily News and we were doing well. And we were at some event. This jackass is like, well, we're going to do something with Vice because, Vice is, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, great for you. And he's like, why are you around? I'm like, just remember, out of the 200 channels, Vice is like 197.
Yeah.
And you know what number 2 is?
ABC or
WG. This is cable.
Oh, okay.
WGN said, so people would rather watch a Law and Order episode repeat that they've seen 8 times and see new content on Vice.
Sure.
But the thing is, if you can get people to understand, that Law and Order crowd to go into it, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
We need a dun-dun bumper.
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun.
But you're like the antithesis of High Times. Like High Times was the we make fun of them earlier because they're not what they used to be. But does something happen?
I have the High Times magazine.
Oh, yeah.
Keep having that conversation.
Well, I'm just saying because like High Times is like it's not what it used to be. Early days of the culture when it wasn't outlaw culture. Yes, in the car. It was when it was good. When there was because that's what the market was. It was all smugglers and it was all outlaw growers.
It was all naughty.
Yeah.
It still has a centerfold.
Counterculture.
It's got a centerfold for weed. Still to this day, it's weed porn.
But but the early days is when it was more significant because it seems they've.
But there wasn't the industry that goes on like this, and for it to be what everybody has raised money to be, it has to be mainstream.
It lost its relevance, though. It's not necessarily mainstream, in my opinion, anymore because people aren't growing. It used to be the Growers magazine. Now that you can go to the store, they haven't switched to become culturally relevant in the way that Dope Magazine did. High Times bought them and then buried Dope Magazine. So if we're going to normalize this, how do you anticipate the Fresh Toast kind of being a part of that? If we're going to normalize it, how do you not bring the sommeliers and the altruism to the mainstream that doesn't really care about that? They just want the results,
So once again, I always say the industry kind of looks at itself in a vacuum. So let's look at a bigger picture. Can you name the top 10 wine magazines there are? Oh, wait a minute. Let's make it easier. Can you name the top 5 vodka magazines there are?
No. I had no idea that there was going to be a quiz, but
I'm not ready.
I have always been very good at contemporaneous answers. So I'm going to say Vodka Quarterly. There's Das Pour, and then I'm going to say Vodka because that's the German, not the German. That's the Russian pronunciation.
So
no,
when it goes mainstream, the problem is High Times if they had perhaps had a different leadership model, could have become much more relevant and integrated themselves into a big movement. But in today's world, we gather our information from sources that we trust. And we like to go to places that give us a variety of our interests. As we talk about High Times dying, so is Model Railroader. So is all these hobby Yarn Tomorrow. All these type of magazines are dying out. And when you look at the distribution of them all, they're small. Part of that is they didn't embrace digital early on. Yeah. And part of that movement has moved on. And now I could see it in a variety of other ways, from a TikToker, from this, from that. Yeah. So you have to stay relevant based on what your audience is looking for and give them more than just one piece of information.
But not that line with the relevance and an online shit, like that's where I fortunately got lucky. I think where I'm at. I didn't start out trying to be a podcast guy with this lawyer from Chicago.
I asked him to do it because I was broke.
But it's like I started early on with the internet. I had some friends online. I met these guys online. I'm like, hey, this website which I call now the Brickweed. But at the biggest point, we were hitting 1 million unique hits a month. More than which is great, right? It was all online because we were one of the ones early days. If you just had marijuana.com or weed.com, you would get a bunch of hits all over it. But the culture has evolved because you have that you're taking that daytime. Your audience is that daytime mom who you're trying to achieve the purchasers, and there's still that subset, the culture people. High Times want to appeal. They kind of still appeal because they have events and they're still got a legacy name, but there are still many other websites that are like the grower websites on YouTube have hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And we talk about policy, we're in the middle, and then you have other people who are trying to come out and they're
and that's why you have to find partners.
Yeah.
we're happy. We run legal stuff because people are interested in that. It's a subset of our content portfolio, but they do that. But you have to understand these growers people. I mean, how many of you have run into a college kid getting out of college? Oh my God, I'm going to raise some money and I'm going to have a grow farm. And they know jack about it. They're subscribing to all these sites. And then they realize this is a lot of work and I need to raise like $2 million. And then they're like, whoa!
That's right.
I hear people all the time, I'm going to invest in a grower because I'm going to give them $1 today and I'll get 10 tomorrow. And then they get all into it. And then they realize this is hard.
Yeah.
I'll never forget, about right before COVID, one of our investors asked us to meet with this guy who runs a family office, and he comes and he's like, yeah, whether we may choose him, I'm going to send you, we're not going to invest in you, but we want you to look, because we're looking at doing our first major first major weed investment, and it's 7 figures. So they send me, and it's grow farm. So, I look through the deck, blah, 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 blah. So he comes in and he's like, suit, tie, he's, kind of talking down to me. He's like, yeah, I just want to get, I'm just clear that we're not going to give you any money. This is but we're doing this. And, this looks like a cool cannabis company and the family's really into it. So what can you tell me about it? I'm like, well, my first thing to know is anybody in the family or anybody in your firm familiar with commodities or farming? And he does this. I want us to value each other's time, and I would prefer if you stick on topic.
Whoa.
And I'm like, I'm sorry. He's like, yeah, I came here today because I want to evaluate this deck, look at it. And I'm like, well, that's why I'm asking if you have anybody in agriculture or commodity background. And he's like, I'm not sure that's relevant. I'm like, a grow farm, a grow operation is a farm, right? And you grow the weed.
Wow.
And all of a sudden you could see this light hit up on him.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I was aware of that. I just didn't look at numbers. I'm like, anybody can give numbers, but unless you are familiar with agriculture and the triumphs and trials of a farm, you're not going to really understand that model and how commodities vary from, avocados cost $3, 1 month, and 3 months later they're $1.95.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware of that. And he was like, oh, I found out later they did not make the investment.
Well, the team too, right? You got to look at the team as far as the experience they have with the grow, because if you just have a bunch of newbies, I mean, the growing, you can start with 100 plants and then end with 80 because whatever, commodity, agriculture, like you're saying.
So you have to think about that. Our thing is we appeal to the main audience, and we're helping change that. So, and I think Josh and I talked about that because, he's so brilliant. When you look at trends, so if you go all the way back on how things change, no one would have thought 15 years ago that gay marriage would be possible in 3 lifetimes, much less the acceptance of gays now. But what changed that whole thought process for the nation was Will and Grace, the TV show, because it made it not scary, and people invited into their home. They laughed with it. They felt comfortable with it. And then that's what allowed the process to change.
And they didn't make it derisive.
Right.
But when you see weed portrayed in the media, you see a lot of derisiveness, or at least making fun of the people that are using the product.
Well, we'll get there in a second.
Okay.
So then the next major trend that changed was S&M. So when 50 Shades of Grey came out, per capita, more books sold in the Southeast than anywhere else. And friends of mine at NBC and ABC said, that means that America now has a higher tolerance of S&M discussions. And you may remember that Ellen and Matt Lauer from the Today Show were going back and forth, and they shared like some, mocked up S&M photo. And they said they had almost no complaints. They said if that had happened pre 50 Shades of Grey, they would have been flooded with it. But we become culturally norm to it. And that's what we're working at. Now, when you look at gay versus weed, if you remember pre Will and Grace, every gay character was a stereotype, and it was soap and, all these other things where it was just Will and Grace was the first one that made him look like, they made Will look like the guy next door, the neurotic, bumbling attorney that could be your neighbor in a suburb. And then that's what evolved it. And when you look at some of these TV shows, you're starting to get them all. I mean, look, the biggest transformation that shows that we as a country are changing our attitude is Fox News now covers weed as a business story, not a cultural story. And Fox had 2 years ago released that the majority of their viewers are pro-legalization. And CBS came out, I think yesterday, with a poll that says 91% of America is okay with weed being legal. About the same amount of people who believe in more gun regulations. Congress, though, tends to run behind it.
Yeah, those gun regulations have just not gone anywhere.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids have died.
Yeah.
Do you think that hidden market that you've been hitting, I like to say hidden because it's people who don't venture into cannabis until it's legal in their state, like medical. You know, I noticed out here in Washington when it became medical, lots of people who never consumed cannabis, older people, you know, like, oh my God, this is great. This is the first time I'm doing it. I don't know why I was holding out because they're waiting for it to be legal. That's who you're waiting. Is that what you're appealing to?
You know, 80% of people are rule followers, and they're not, and they don't, or I would say 90% of people are rule followers. They're not innovators, maybe in a small portion, but they're going to stay within the main system.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to go to Rick Steves. They're going to go to Applebee's. They're going to buy La Crema. They're going to buy all these things that are the mainstreams type of stuff because that's what other people have said to do.
Yeah.
When it becomes legal, more people will experiment and it'll do well. Now, unfortunately, what we're seeing, what's happening in California and Washington, is those people go to the legal market and try it out, but it's confusing. And there's way too many choices and no one's really helping them. And it's more expensive because of the tax system.
Yeah.
And so they're dwindling down and they're buying illegal weed now because now they think it's okay. And they have a guy who is a friend of their kids who's like, oh, I'll hook you up. And they're like, I love it.
Yeah.
And they do it because, you know, Peter brings over once a week a bunch of, you know, edibles or brings over some pre-rolls and they don't have to do it. They don't have to worry about like, at some places where it's like going through a Cheesecake Factory menu, like,
Yeah.
oh, wow.
Well, like New York market, before it became legal, they had the delivery, you know, aspect for a while there. And, you know, people just show up like a high maintenance. You know, it was just like that. People were showing up. Then it became legal. Now
They made fun of that in 1999
Yeah.
when they made the movie Half Baked with Dave Chappelle. The weed guy came to their apartment and like knocked on their door and said, well, I have, you know, mediums, I got high quality, and I have Reggie's. And that was a delivery system that they did completely illicit 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, going back to the mainstream, now you can go to, generally, if you go during a prime part of the day, you can go to the grocery store, talk to the guy who's in charge of liquor and said, look, I just want a white that's fruity and isn't too sweet. Here's your 5 things. That's what America wants.
Yeah.
America doesn't want a whole shelf because we're like,
That's right.
I got $10.
Well, that's kind of the Green Flower Media has created this Ganjier certification, which may help fill that gap, provided that somebody at the retail location isn't just saying, we got a bucket of different SKUs here. We're like a Greek restaurant. Our phone book is also the menu, and could like say, well, what are you going for? Well, what types of flavors do you like? Well, what are you going to be doing? And then if you're going to be doing those and you like those flavors, this is the weed for you.
Yeah.
Then they don't have, they've had somebody who's helped them and they don't have to make a decision. May explain why they enjoyed having their friend come over because he just had a thing. It's like, well, there's one choice. I love it. You know,
Or here's 5 things. I know them all. And if you have a bad experience, I'll walk you into something else. Because the other thing, people find a hard time going to the store and say, hey, what I bought last time isn't what I want.
How much of your content does, obviously, I imagine a good portion is designate to that person who just walks in and wants the 4 choices, but how much of it's also devoted to the bud tender that is going to give that information? Do you devote any time to like the educational stuff?
There are probably 40 publications who do that.
Yeah.
And that's not really our specialty because all of our content is automatically syndicated up. And so we're very clear that everything that we do has to be it goes out into syndication.
Sure.
For, you know, to a newspaper or to Smart News, to Apple.
Is there
so it's all consumer based.
Yeah.
standards and protocols and procedures? Are there regulations for what the Associated Press is looking for in syndicated news?
Funny you should say that. Yes, there is. We are very lucky to have on our board the former head of ABC News.
Oh, wow.
And so we have very strict, anything that's medical, anything that is recommendatory, we always have a link. And we do some non-cannabis medical, but all of our medical has 2 links that go to studies to make it sure it's very clean.
Yeah.
But we also, you know, we have a standard format. Here's what it looks like. It's always, you know, we make it very clear. And part of the reason we got to syndications, it took us to our public facing syndication. It took us We had one partner after 9 months, which was the New York Daily News. But Tribune took us 2 years, and they watched us for 2 years, and they watched our performance with the New York Daily News. And then we also syndicate content out to a closed list of 80% of America's practicing physicians. And they also waited 2.5 years, and then they gave us very strict protocols. So everything you say, while it looks kind of lighter and fluffier, it's actually a very clean piece of content that can stand up. We had one, our Canadian partners, Post Media, reached out to us and said, and so I sent them the information. I'm like, here's all the information about our story. And that was it.
Is that because it seemed like an opinion, or?
No, it was, they get, people just complain.
Oh, okay.
We get very few complaints directly, but occasionally we get them through our, because, our reach is one thing, our newspaper partners' reach is much larger.
Oh, sure.
I like the long sales cycle too. It just, kind of reminds me of the cannabis industry in certain respects. They waited to see if you'd die. So like, to all those would-be cannabis media companies tuning in, get used to waiting and seeing if you don't die before somebody will actually buy your stuff.
Well, and this is about Google. Google waits to see if you're going to die.
Yeah.
I mean, Google has hidden time zones, but after about 8 months and about 17 months, they begin treating you differently because they look at how consistent you are and what you're doing, and then they begin to treat you differently.
Yeah. Like an authority.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you brought up Google because, that's been key to where I've been at, like my Googleability with the activism. I've just known like the algorithm or whatever. It's like I've been trying to appeal like the general public when I first started writing, and everything was kind of with the stories of like, hey, we're just citizens. It was none of that hippie championship. Like it was just more like you should be mad too because I'm mad. I'm just your neighbor. There's a chance for us all to go to jail. This was early. I've been blogging for now 10 years, so there's enough arrests and raids going on back then that enough people get upset about it. But I just still think there's that. Like I said, you're appealing to the broader market, and then when I was doing mine, it was more towards like the heartstrings of anger. You know what I mean? Like that's where the activism, my focus has been like the raids and not the society. Which
so, if you're asking my advice, which you're not, but I'm going to give it.
No, I really am though.
Write your stories like you'd be on King 5 or the Today Show, because you're not going to move a huge amount of people into anger based on this.
Yeah.
This is not we partner with Brookings and John Hudak, who's amazing.
Yes.
And right before the election, right before the midterms, they did a survey, and weed is not, while the majority of America wants weed, it's not in their top 5 concerns.
Right.
It's security, it's job, it's all this. And so now when something happens like the riot, all these unfortunate deaths around police brutality and so forth, that rallies people. But even those numbers are minuscule compared to the population of the country.
Yeah.
But what happens is those stories come out. Hoda does that, and ABC News does that, People Magazine does that, and then people say, you know what, that is wrong.
Yeah. And
so they mention it at the next time they're at a family gathering, and they tell their congressman, we need to do better.
Sure.
And so that it's turning a battleship.
Yeah.
But in doing that, you're engaging all this other stuff. And that's what we try to do every day. So if you tell those stories, more people will share them around. Because once again, 90% of people don't want to be out front. They want to be part of the public opinion. And the more you show it's part of the public opinion.
Yeah.
We talked about high times and losing a little bit of relevance. How do you continue to stay topical and try to pivot to stay relevant with your topics? And two-part question: what advice do you have to a new entrant, whether they're coming into the East Coast or writing, creating a new publication? Is there anything that you would do different? And what advice do you have for them?
I would say that if you're looking at starting a new cannabis magazine, don't. And because as it goes to legalization, others will be absorbed up. You will have a cannabis column in the New York Times. You'll have more lifestyle stories. You'll have how to eat a gummy bear on the Today Show. You'll have all this stuff that goes out there. And and so you have to be up with relevancy, because a chunk of these people, and I can name 3 examples in our industry, did it as a way to get a bunch of investor money. And then they're like, I'm going to walk away with $100 million. And that's just not the case. And it's the same with Model Railroader. And there's some really good there's Green Market Report that's great in business. There is Cannabis.net, who's really great in the stoner popular. There's us. There's some really good magazines out there right now, but the industry just can't. People don't want that many specific magazines anymore.
Yeah.
You go to YouTube and you have your YouTube channel, but most people don't watch it.
Right.
I remember years ago, a friend of mine was in the video industry, and he was doing a deal with Vegas for video at in all the hotel rooms, on-demand video.
Oh, wow.
And Vegas has a primarily male population that goes to visit, and so we got to talking about adult videos. So do you know the average length of watching an adult video?
5 minutes.
Seconds.
4 minutes and 20 seconds.
You're closest, 7 minutes.
Holy shit! What are you, champions?
Well, they have to get into it first. They have to believe the fantasy.
No, it's not that they have to have to get to the moment they find the most exciting.
Yeah.
But that also goes to show we have a short.
Yes.
I mean, you look at things like Smart News, Apple News. We all want things, and we can do about 8 stories, and then we want a new topic.
Yeah.
So you have to be constantly thinking about that. Now, your first question: how do we stay relevant? I have 3 major partners who tell me that sometimes, that's not working anymore. You need to change that. And then we also get feedback from our readers. So we get back and we get all these things of what's working and what's not, and all that stuff. So we get this analytics every week.
Okay.
Early on, because we have a diversity of stuff, Apple must have had some fight with other people because we did some royal news and outside of the cannabis in our cultural area. And we, for about 6 months, were the second largest royal news segment of Apple News.
Wow.
Well, then all of a sudden it went away like in a day.
Huh.
And so they must have been having some negotiations with some other bigger players, and then we've never gotten that back. So it's also, we're always like, let's try this. Well, we tried this 2 years ago. Let's bring this back. So the one thing that we've never done, and it's funny because when you look at all the analytics, both our social media analytics and our reader analytics, is food and wine are really the most compatible to what we write.
Okay.
And that is the one area where we've never connected. We do great with relationships, sex, pop culture, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That is one area that we have consistently fall flat at.
What's your opinion on why maximum yield, is that what it's called? There's a Maxim Yield was a grow magazine, and then there's Maxim magazine, which is a fitness magazine.
Right.
You can name a dozen other ones. Why do you think they failed, and what makes you different?
Well, we're right here in public. So let me see how.
Also hit the editing floor. Yeah.
Let me just see. How can I say this? Some people, when a lot of people enter into this industry, and all variety, media, products, and all that, with an intense sense of passion, advocacy, and entitlement. Well, why wouldn't you give me $1 million to start this? Because this is a great thing. And let's not focus on this. We've got to get our story out. I can name, and I won't hear, I can name 3 magazines that raised millions of dollars and had no business plan. But they were part of the bro culture, and it was private planes and big parties and all this other stuff, but never had a way to make money. But because we're the next big thing, cannabis is hot, blah, 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 they kept doing this. And then it all fell apart.
So they didn't have a real business plan, right?
No.
So they were just burning money.
And then it's also a numbers game. Okay. 2 years ago, they were legally, let's even say illegally, there might have been 15,000, 20,000 growers from this big to this big.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Now let's think about that. How much are they going to spend in advertising, and how much are they going to spend to help you grow?
Very little, because you're not allowed to deduct that advertising dollar. The IRS will audit you.
Well, not only that. And so let's say you have 20,000 growers. So that's 20, let's say, 20,000 easy number. Now, each one of those growers need 5 key things. They need lights, they need manure, they need, some infrastructure.
Yeah.
So let's say there's 100,000. So that's 100,000. They're going out and making 100,000 purchases every year. Okay, now you have all these lights. well, these lights are going for a very specific country. And, you go, the last big CannaCon here, there were like 10 light companies.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, which is tough.
Yes.
And it's tough to make, and it's like TED Talks. It's like, it used to be the TED Talk. And now like, yeah, I gave a TED Talk. What was your, my TED Talk was South Burien. How many of these conferences are you going to go to? We have more, this industry. Okay. So they're thinking in the next 2 years will be a $30 billion industry.
Right.
Alcohol is a $238 billion industry. The weed industry has twice the amount of meetings in the alcohol industry.
Mm-hmm.
And currently, the weed industry is the size of Subway sandwiches. It generates the same amount of gross cash as Subway does. So you cannot constantly be building business after business after business after business on top of this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we have some non-cannabis streams of revenue.
Well, even people see the green rush though, and with the media side of things, because I think you've done well to aim for that middle of the road of the content. But then, I was thinking more of the Googleability. Back to that, like Mickey 420, you Google it, you'll find things I've been doing for 10, 12 years. Advocacy articles and other websites and everything across. I got a good footprint. But like your writers, I imagine they're all known people, because like when I started doing this, it couldn't just come out as Miguel. I had to come out as Miggy 420, or I wish I had a cooler one like Method Man. Like I really wish I had a cooler one, but it's what I got. It's what I did. But the markets are still, you have your middle area, but you still have the growers and you still have the culture. There's still a wide sweeping thing, but we're at the point too now. You can Google a person. I'm very big a subject matter expert. Like that previous website I was on, there's a bunch of names on there. Like you're like, is this really a person? You're only a web website with one article. There's too much ghostwriting, too many contracting out to somebody.
And Google looks at that.
Yeah, but it also shows like, but if you look up somebody, my point being is just if you're gonna take someone's advice, it should be from someone who's in a position that you already want to be in, not somebody who's Joe the homeless guy, who just started his YouTube channel.
I love that, because when you see two homeless guys walking down the street talking to each other, one of them is giving the other advice. And if they were smart, that other one would be like, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't have a home.
Yeah, seriously.
But they don't. They're like, that's a good idea.
But cannabis is big with that. We have lots of people throwing money into it who are throwing money at people who have no experience. No.
As they do with cryptocurrency.
Mm.
Hey, if they got a license,
as they did with derivatives.
Yeah.
Hey, there's time. There's time. I'll never forget the very first cannabis conference I went to in Vegas, and it was fabulous for a variety of reasons. But I'm at this party, and I'm talking to people. I'm, we're about to launch this. He's like, "Are you looking for investors?" Yeah. He says, "Well, what's the return?" I'm like, yeah. He's like, "No." He said, "See those people over there?" And it was some traditionally good-hearted, classic traditional cannabis growers. This couple. They were just like, we're here to sell good weed, and that's our mission in life.
Yeah.
He said, "See them?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he says, "They're expanding, and they have this wonderful opportunity expanding. I'm loaning them $1 million. They have a balloon payment in 12 months. They will not be able to make it, and I will own I will own a $12 million grow for $1 million."
Damn.
And I'm like, "That's cold." And he says, "That's business."
Yeah.
That's business. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the cannabis industry is transforming that way too. And
Seriously.
and it's a fault of his. It's also a fault of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to, this, this isn't 1950 and hey gang, let's build a barn.
Yeah.
And, and when you look at farming trends, it's Archer Daniel Midland and all this other stuff. A third of our food is on the West Coast is grown in California because of the fires, food prices are going to go up. That was in the news the other day. So you have to understand the economics to it all. And, you can't wish, you can't wish things to happen.
Right.
Because it just doesn't happen that way.
It's business. There's a rec shop owner here in Seattle who's gotten a really bad reputation for owning Uncle Ike's because in order to keep the distance, there's a 1,000-foot distance for schools and churches and whatever. And so in order to keep a competitor from opening up within his neighborhood, he put in a pinball machine, which is attractive to kids. And so therefore you can't open up anywhere else. And so that was his way of kind of keeping it. So people thought that was a lack of altruism and that it wasn't about the cannabis industry. And I'm scratching my head going, this is business.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
I still don't understand why people hate Ian Eisenberg of Uncle Ike's. They call him racist. They call him a businessman. And I personally haven't seen anything racist. And all I see is business, but you have all these altruistic people who think that he should be giving away free cannabis when this is a business. This is a commodity. This isn't even medicine anymore.
Well,
this is the medical market is dead.
Ian fell out with the crowd because he saw cannabis as a business.
Yeah.
Selling weed as a business. He didn't early on here have that. We're changing the world. Come up from the hemp fest and all that.
That's all that's going on east of the Mississippi. It's all social equity on the East Coast. Well, and then that federal bill from Schumer was all social equity. So if you give people free stuff, they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing is we all talk about social equity. 90% of this industry is run by white men.
Yeah.
And the people who are talking about social equity and making it legal, white men.
Yeah.
And the people who are backing it, white men. It is, I just did another story on this. I'm a white man. I'm also gay. And I'm definitely outside the circle. And I've seen a lot of women outside the circle. And I almost, when I go to meetings, you just really don't see that many people of color who are in the circle. And and even in our own field, I've seen people, straight bros, raise millions of dollars and then close. And who had no business plan. It was all a bunch of this.
Couldn't grow a single gram. And they raised seven figures and couldn't grow a single gram.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
And again, if you don't Google the person you're about to give money to, I don't feel bad for you for losing your money. I mean, this is why I developed that writing. My original intention was to travel the country and do like covering stories like people in prohibition states, being the guy from
but without an outlet, that's a waste of money and time.
Right.
If you don't have an audience, why do it?
Exactly. And that's why
unless it's your personal passion project and you don't need money.
Well, it's all both, right? I mean, like if you can find a job that you like doing every day,
I like doing my job. It is still a freaking grind.
Well, and you still need to make money.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. You've got to figure a way to make money.
Exactly. Well, that's what I was telling him during Prop 215 when medical was coming about. That was used against medical, right? They're like,
they had to be non-profit.
Medicine? Yeah,
it had to be non-profit. That was the California model, and maybe also the Washington State's medical model. I'm not sure.
The feeling behind it was kind of like that.
It was not. It was in the regs, like Harborside. It had to be run as a non-profit. And a lot of those Californian things had to follow that, and so it is.
California isn't really I would say the star model that we would have copied. Colorado has done a great job. They've reduced their black market. They have a cap on things, and the only problem that happened in Colorado is they got saturated because people made good money at the beginning, and everybody else thought they would make good money.
Yeah,
they also they're vertically integrated by the start. So they had the 70-30, and so that's really one of the reasons why I think Colorado has some of the lowest prices in the country. I like how Michigan's doing it. They do bifurcate. You can be vertical, but they only really have the 3 licenses, like they have the 3 license types here in Washington: grow, process, retail. And then out east, you're seeing more shadows of what they're doing in California, with the various types of license classes, including nurseries and transportation, wholesale distribution.
Well, and part of that is governments see it as a way to make money.
Yeah.
I mean, and Lord knows I'm from the South. I love the South, and I love New Orleans. But you have to understand, New Orleans is the only city in the country that bankrupted the mob. When they originally built that casino at the bottom of Canal, there were so many people who put their hands in the casino's pockets that finally they had to stop and go back to the city and say, okay, just come up with a number.
Oh, shit.
I can't, we have someone in Kenner from the school board who's like, I need a little something over here. And then you have someone from Gretna and they're like, and after a while, even the mob's like, well, I think we've been showed a lesson.
That's funny.
And that's why it took them something like 5 years to open that place because they couldn't get it was just a hot mess.
Wow. So you think that's what's going to happen to some states are just going to miss the bus, and then they're just going to have Walmart that's selling weed because it was just too crooked and they couldn't get their act together?
Hold up. On that question, have you written any stories about how in California they're bypassing the rec model where it's direct from producer to consumer? Because that's going to end up screwing everybody, all these license holders over.
Yeah. Well, we've mainly done stories about how California's model is not is both hurting the industry and promoting the black market.
Mm-hmm.
and that they need to get their act together on that.
Because that's
And
the
by
first I've
making
heard of it.
healthier.
It's not even technically legal, but there's no regulators stopping it from happening, from my understanding. So to be a producer processor selling directly to the public is phenomenal, because you're going to be making 2 to 3 times more than you would, because at least in Washington, they're taking 3x over your wholesale price.
Mhm.
If you can avoid that, you're going to be selling a lot more product.
Well, Steve D'Angelo and I have a disagreement on this particular topic. You have to look long term. You're building a whole new industry.
Yeah.
The last time we built a major industry like that was video.
1920? Oh, video.
Mm.
All of a sudden we came out with these. We built a product, then we had to, we built the content, then we had to product size it, then we had a net retail outlet, Blockbuster,
Oh, yeah.
so forth. Okay, within 10 years, that model changed. Blockbuster and Hollywood Video, started with mom and pops, just like in the cannabis industry, and all of a sudden you had these grainy and only a certain amount. Then all of a sudden you got all these other products, and all of a sudden you walked in the store and it's like way too much. I don't have what I want, and then all of a sudden grocery stores got into it.
Mm.
Redbox,
Wow.
right?
Redbox,
Yeah.
or just renting and buying videos in the grocery store. There used to be a whole
Safeway,
section, a
yeah.
Safeway or Kroger or
Yeah.
7-Eleven.
Wow.
And then that hurt all the mom and pops and began hurting Blockbuster. Well, then the next thing that happened, then comes streaming, screwed it all out straight to consumer. Which is exactly what you're talking about.
Mm.
That's what the Amazon model. You want something, here it is tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you have to look at that stuff. So I always try to encourage, look, the cannabis industry, because of our size, is not going to make ginormous federal regulation changes that we want. They have to partner with people who have other vested interest. And
Yeah.
who are the 3 other industries that have vested interest in our industry?
Tobacco, alcohol, and food?
Pharma.
Pharma.
Mm.
So now, what are 3 of the top lobbyists in the country? Tobacco, alcohol, and pharma.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are talking to Schumer and so forth and helping build some laws, because those laws are helping them. Because at the end of the day, when it's federally legal, Uncle Ike's is going to struggle, because you can buy it at CVS, Walmart, and QFC, just like you buy every other product that's similar. And at the end of the day, that's what the consumer wants. The consumer wants to go in and get ice cream, cookies, chips, weed, and a Bloody Mary for the next morning.
Yeah, I don't want to make 2 trips.
I ask people all the time, how many specialty beer stores do you go to? There's one specialty beer store that I know of up off Aurora.
Yeah. I do like the craft brew, though, and I like how there are certain regs, and especially the micro business license with a delivery endorsement in Massachusetts. I have a client that we're putting together decks for him. It allows them to do that, so they can grow, process, and then website order direct to consumer and deliver. But that took 3 years of a whole bunch of people, really making a lot of a stink to get this type of direct to consumer model. But I mean, if there was limitations on canopy size, I don't see why you can't have a type of license like that, where, just like a tasting room, you're just allowed to have that one dispensary where you're allowed to sell that product that you've grown there. That would be a welcome license type, in my opinion. I think that could.
But let's look at 3 years down the road. So COVID,
Mhm.
more people drank in COVID than any other time in recent history. Thousands of beer companies closed.
Wow.
Now, why is that? Who runs the beer company? The distributors and the brands. You can't sell liquor and beer through most places across the USS without going through a distributor.
Mm.
Southern, and all the other types.
Yeah. Wow.
So the way all those craft beers made money is through their tasting rooms, their in-person events, in-person event type of thing, buying it directly from them, and occasionally a few specialty shops. Well, once you couldn't go to a restaurant, they didn't have the operating capital. Most of them didn't have operating capital, and they closed. Now they begin then finding other ways to go, buy a case to go, support us, go fund me, all that sort of stuff. But they, significantly reduced. And if they had high overhead, like a high rent or something, they closed.
Yeah.
Now, and Budweiser, Miller, and Coors had their profits dipped a little bit, even though there was more use. And do you know why that is?
Cannabis?
No. Well, that dropped because that's in California. People want to use weed Monday through Wednesday. The most profitable beer is event-based beer. Bars.
Whoa.
Ball
Because
games.
it's kegs. Kegs are a lot easier to sell the bottles and cans.
It's like
Bottles and cans cost a lot more to produce, distribute, process, the whole bit, as opposed to kegs.
And what's the price point and the profitability? Because if I go buy that beer, it's a Budweiser, because they have such large market share at a bar down the street, it might be $4 or $5 for that pint.
Mhm.
If I go to the Seattle, what's the name of the baseball team? Mariners game. That's going to be a $10 beer.
Mhm.
And so that profitability has to at least get some goes to the bar or the brewery. I mean, some probably goes to the people that own the ballpark. But yeah.
So let's play that. So let's go. Say we go to the Hobnobber after this. You're going to get a $4 beer, Budweiser.
Mhm.
How much is a 6-pack at Kroger?
Right. The
10
$8
ish.
Yeah.
$8.
Yeah.
Right.
Cheap.
So they make a lot more money you buying it at the Hobnobber than you buying it here, and that's why they do so much effort on draft.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
There's an interesting license type out of Michigan called the marijuana temporary event license. So that would be fascinating to see the data on that. Now, you usually to obtain one of these, there's a couple different types. One of them would be the retailer one, so you'd already have to have your dispensary license to be able to get that next level. But and then there's another one where you're just going to have an event where there's consumption on it. But yeah, that'd be nice.
That was going to be the
frontier
workaround for the consumption lounges, because we've got a Class C felony in Washington State to maintain and operate a marijuana lounge. And so the workaround that we were when I wrote the bill for that, was using that language of having temporary event licenses. But there's a lot of pushback on that. But I'm down for loopholes.
Consumption lounges are not going to be a thing.
They don't make very much money.
And they're not going to be a thing. If you have to serve food, then all of a sudden you're competing with some place that serves food.
Right.
What if a woman doesn't want to do that, and you're not buying in bulk? So let's just use the example. Let's say we go to the Hobnobber again.
Yeah.
And we don't have anything. Well, we're going to go for one drink. Usually that winds up with maybe 2, maybe even 3.
Sure.
Or maybe 2 and an appetizer. You go to a consumption lounge, you get 1 joint. You're there for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Especially today's joints. We got some wonderful joints that were wrapped in a half a gram of hash.
Brought to you by.
Going to take. I'm going to be smoking that joint until I'm 40. Crap, I'm 41. It's good joint.
Funny. Yeah. But
So you got to think about consumer behavior.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say 2 things because you guys talk about that the market as far as the keg. It's also resembles with the sodas and the Happy Meal. When you get they get more money because doesn't cost that much. But the other thing with the California, when they're doing that so they're not even asking a license. You can only be a business, a grower, a processor, and there's no transfer license, no nothing. Huh?
No, not that I'm aware of, but it's like I said, it's something that they're able to get away with. It was never intended for producers or processors in California to sell directly to the public, but for whatever reason, they're doing it because of because of the pandemic and with the delivery access and that whole push, that you might as well just sell direct. And so they're not even waiting for this distribution license. They're just selling directly without any recourse.
Neat. I mean, but that's always about cannabis, right? There's always the gray area that people step their toes in there and try and make it.
A lot of that gray area just comes from the lack of understanding of the plant and the just terrible laws that we have regarding it. So the laws and how bad they are really do reflect how poorly understood the plant is by the population in general. I mean, if everybody knew about cannabis as deeply and as detailedly as we did, the laws would be fundamentally different. And the industry would probably rival alcohol because it would literally be that substitute good effect. Or, I got a backache, I don't want to take any Advil. You'd reach for a very specific type of dose that and its effect. So it's going to be interesting.
And that was the story today on the Today Show.
Yeah.
This morning on the Today Show. So those type stories are what's changing around.
Yeah, there was vets in the Today Show yesterday too.
Yeah.
They were advocating for marijuana. So they are pulling in that segment of people, but they're not like you said, they're not being active as far as this is wrong, it's fucked up. It's more like they're presenting their story and just saying this.
And that's what and because then people feel and the more people feel normal, the more likely they are to use.
Right.
I mean, you go in to an Uncle Ike's or particularly Have a Heart, which had a brilliant model because they had the best store in Belltown for tourists.
Yeah.
And you see, mom and pop from Minnesota, and they're like, we just thought we would try an edible on the trip.
Right off the cruise liner. Yeah,
And they're so nervous because they're
We're
going
on
to
the
take
plane
one.
and then they
They're
wanna
going to
get
take
out.
one chocolate. And they're like, "Do you think we're?" I'm like, "Yeah, what do you just stick it in your purse and not going through your purse?" And they're wrapped.
yeah.
So it's I know people who have flown with it, and they're like, so I'm like, it's wrapped. It's not like a drug dog throwing you down because you have a chocolate gummy.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
So let's maybe wrap this up with some crystal ball predictions. What do you anticipate for legalization? We saw a lot of speculation in the stock market between October and November. A lot of retracement and profit giving since then. Pot stocks aside, what is your expectation for federal legalization? What is your crystal ball prediction for the industry 2022 and beyond? What are you seeing?
Well, just framing that, like we have one of our readers, Sri Ram, who lives in Seattle, who lets us know that he's a big fan of edibles, but he's also a big fan of vodka and rice and chips. And he's never advocated for the other three.
Rice and chips and vodka, never try to put them in jail. You don't need to advocate for them.
Yeah.
But just as many people go to jail for vodka than they do with weed.
But after the effects.
After the facts.
Yes.
So we have to pay for COVID. And despite everything, there's a lot of states have a lot of gaping holes. And even states with hardcore Republican governors are having to look at it from a financial point of view. So the big two changes that will happen, though, fundamentally without federal legalization, which I think will come sometime in 22, is interstate commerce and banking. Once those two things happen, you're going to see a significant change, or the hope of a significant change. Now, we've written stories about California and Canada. What happens is you have this huge upswing in the market beforehand, because you have people like the Tilray people and stuff like, oh, give us, we're going to be worth, we're going to rival Apple. We had one company say, we're going to be as big as Domino's Sugar. And I'm like, oh, God, we're going to sell as much candy as that. I'm like, oh, you're going to be selling to kids on Easter? So you're going to have this huge uptick. But as we saw with California and Canada and everywhere else, once it happens, you have 2 to 3 years of regulation coming in.
Yep.
And we do an incredible, we work with 80% of America's doctors, and we work with like 50,000 doctors every other week. And we get feedback is they're not going to, medical marijuana isn't going to be a thing until it's FDA approved. And most importantly, it has a reimbursement code.
Oh man, that would be awesome.
So once that happens, it will be as big as other stuff. Now it'll move into, right now it can move into, but most people don't go there because the consistency still is not there. So what I predict is you're going to have a bumpy the rest of 2021 with 2022 going into it. And either the industry gets in front of it and builds better partnerships with alcohol and pharma and tobacco, or they're going to write the laws that's going to make it really difficult for leaders in the industry to overcome that.
Yeah, that's how the banking industry does it with an SRO. Their self-regulatory organizations are the ones that write the bills for the industry, for the banking industry, to make it too complicated for senators to understand what's going on. And that's why the banking industry is able to get away with what they do. So we need a self-regulatory organization. The NACB is one of them, but they're not moving fast enough to create an organization that's capable of doing that. So hopefully something gets figured out, because that's exactly what we need.
Well, do you think a lot of that problem too, though, is a lot of the out-of-state people, like Washington State when it was medical? There's a big problem when you've got people successful in the thing, pulling in revenue. They don't want to be friends with everybody else and join forces and create a coalition. And that's the
problem. Look, there's an avocado association. If the avocado people can get together,
seriously though,
and all the ranchers are part of beef. They all fight, but they come together.
Yeah.
And if you really look at the people who are heading these national organizations, they're about as milquetoast as possible. MPP did a great job when they hired Stephen. He is a great guy, and he appeals to DC. You've got to appeal to Congress to get things done. Yeah. And that's what we work on every day. We try to give props to some people for what they do. We try to slam Florida for what they're doing.
You should.
But it is.
And Georgia. Slam Georgia. That is terrible what they're doing there.
Well, I'm talking just specifically with weed.
Well, so was I. Their medical is terrible.
Oh, I'm talking about how 71% of their voters voted for it, and the governor stopped that.
Yeah, that's more along the lines.
That's
like South Dakota.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah,
and you know, because you're starting to say we went into run to a dictatorship, and we're Big Brother, and we know better.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah.
And so we do share those type stories, and we write them in kind of funnier ways, like five ways. You know, the governor. We haven't written this, but we're going to write this next week. The 5 ways the governors of Florida has said, "I don't care about voters."
Oh, nice.
So we try to do things like that because those things like that get shared around, even by people who are moderate or like, because people feel passionate about something. We had and I know we're wrapping up, but we had a woman call us up, this PR person, and she hounded me. I mean, she was like a dog with a bone every day. I'm doing the most eco-friendly, green, pro-cannabis packaging for the industry. It's going to be revolutionary. You know, it's done by angels and a unicorn has licked it. All this. And that's just not the stories we do. We don't do this business story. 5 days, every day. You didn't respond to my email. So delete. I get a phone call on Friday. And she has tracked my phone number. She's like, I'm not sure you're getting my emails. I'm like, I'm not even sure who you are.
Oh my God.
And she's like, I'm doing this revolution. I'm like, before you say another word, just remember, 87% of America has ice cream in their freezer right now. And not one of them called their congressman to say, we need better ice cream packaging.
No. Seriously, though. Wow.
So
until ice cream packaging is like, that's one of the problems though with weed packaging is that it's bottles and cans. And so like, as long as it's recyclable, recycle it.
Look, I think packaging in the weed industry is great because it's the same as the candy industry and it's the same as the alcohol industry. That you don't need to, if you want to spend money helping make it better by engaging Congress and working and partnering with people who partner with candy, partner with alcohol.
How come the beer that I can go buy in a can, that's not childproof? It pops open real easy. And that can get the kids drunk and they could die. But that weed that I'm going to go buy has regulations that say that it has to be in an odor-proof, sealed, child-proof container.
And you're limited on how much you can buy.
So you say there's a discrepancy between cotton candy vodka that you could screw off and drink and the fact that there's no law, you can't have cotton candy gummies anymore?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, that was even in the federal bill.
That's pretty insightful.
In the federal bill, you're not allowed to have flavored vapes.
I get cornered because I get to a variety of parties. I get cornered at cocktails parties. What you're doing is wrong. And I'm like, so you say and I'll literally say this, so you say with a drink in your hand?
Yeah.
That's bad for kids. You can't kids are using weed. And I'm like, and they're not using weed. And they're like, I'm like, so explain. So what you're saying is we need to punish parents for having open alcohol and we need to put safety tops on all the alcohol. Well, I didn't say that at all. And I'm like, I'm confused at what point what ground you're getting on.
Next time, like, kind of look at their shirt, like there's something in it. And when they're like, what? Oh, your hypocrisy's just showing.
Well, you know, I'm very Southern. So I'm always like,
you're too
help me
genteel
understand
this. I'm from Illinois. I'll just tell you how I think it is. And then if you tell me I'm wrong, I'm like,
Versus Seattle, we're just super passive aggressive, and we'll just tell you we'll hang out with you and never show up again with the Seattle Freeze.
Yeah.
That's how we roll.
Oh, neat.
All right. So I guess with that, we're going to roll this one up. I want to thank my guest,
thank you so
JJ
much.
McKay, Fresh Toast. JJ, where can they find you at? What are your links?
We're at thefreshtoast.com. We're at Get Fresh Toast on Twitter and Instagram, and we're on the Fresh Toast and Fresh Toast News on Facebook.
Awesome.
And you can find the Talking Hedge at the Talking Hedge, and Cannabis Legalization News is all over the place.
Podcast and YouTube channel.
That's right. All the podcast providers and the YouTube channel, Cannabis Legalization News, and soon CannabisLegalizationNews.com, because we're not heeding his advice.
That's it. All right. So with that, I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.
We're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out. Don't forget to smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.